So this is a new presentation. It's not one I've done before. It's based on a book I published in January with RGI Global, which looked at what's the current state of leadership and change in higher education around the world. And basically I ended up saying, I don't think there's a lot of big change taking place except at the level of classrooms, except at the level of departments. And so that triggered this thought that the real engine of transformation and change in universities and colleges around the world are faculty. Now, some others, like instructional designers, like the team in Cape Town, can support faculty, but the big engines of change are not the C-suite, not the president and vice president academic and all those people. It's faculty doing the job every single day, partnering with students, partnering with others to make things happen. So that's the trigger for this conversation. And here's the journey I'm going to take you on. There are kind of 5 segments. The first is to understand what's the disruption that's taking place. The second one is to really understand what's happening to faculty. It's not great right now, especially here in Canada. We had more layoff announcements yesterday from colleges in Ontario. We've had some real disruptions of our post-secondary system over the last 5 years. And then I want to talk about what I've been calling the innovation theatre, the now you see it, now you don't transformations. They're kind of examples of change that are not really change at all. In fact, the more we change, the more we stay the same, is what it looks like. And then I want to talk about some future opportunities and talk about what faculty can do and be very specific about what you can do next semester to make a difference. So that's the journey that I'm going to hopefully take you on. If you want to make any comments and observations, do so in the chat. My colleague Sarah Gavreau is keeping an eye on the chat, and I'll pause from time to time to see if there's something I should respond to there. But as you know, your microphones and video resources are turned off, so the only way you can communicate with me and us, Sarah and I, is through the chat. So here's the kind of proposition. I think we're in what I've been calling and writing about as the interregnum, the in-between time, the time between a really well-known established way of doing things and the emerging new way of doing things. The problem is we don't really know what the new way fully looks like yet. It kind of changes all the time. And those of us who are kind of deeply engaged with AI know that every 2 or 3 weeks there's a big breakthrough and new things happen. So what we have in our space in higher education is the erosion of trust, the changing nature of academic work and of work of universities, but also changing nature of work generally. So for example, if you work in a college and you're teaching for beginning jobs, those jobs are not happening in the same way that they did just 2 years ago. So there's a lot going on in terms of the nature of work in the world, and it impacts us in terms of curriculum, but it also impacts us in terms of our work and the things we do for a living in higher education. So new models of learning and assessment are emerging, but they're kind of confusing. There isn't any kind of clear sense of what these might be, frameworks and patterns, and it's too early to discern what the patterns of the new model of higher education looks like. And our governance, both inside institutions, our boards, our leadership, our policy governance, is very fragmented and fractured right now. That, frankly, they don't really know what to do either. Now, we can wait for everything to sort itself out, but I think that's dangerous. It's dangerous for the work, it's dangerous for trust, and it's danger for our future as faculty. And I'm speaking as a faculty colleague more than anything else here. So I think we have a choice to take leadership. And I think the leadership might come more from the bottom of the organization, those at the front line, those who work with students, do the thing we call teaching and assessment. I think more change and innovation is going to come there than from the board, the president's office, the vice president's office, and so on. And so it should, because we actually know what students may be doing and what they may need, and we're in close connection to the opportunities for change. But there are some other shifts going on. So I live here and work in Canada, and we have the lowest rate of fertility we've had in over 100 years. So we're way below replacement. Our current fertility rate is 1.3. In British Columbia, it's closer to 1. And for replacement, we need it to be closer to 2.1. So we have a big demographic challenge, which is leading to challenges with immigration and the whole issue of newcomers coming to Canada, which is a political issue. So this is being a big problem. And our government, in its wisdom, as did the government of the United Kingdom, has curtailed international students coming into the country, which essentially almost bankrupted some institutions. So there's big funding compression. Colleges and universities are not getting the kind of money that keeps pace with inflation and keeps pace with their rising cost. Coupled with those two things is the emergence of platform organizations. I'm thinking of things like MOOC providers, and you say, oh, MOOCs are dead, they've gone. No, they haven't. A large number of students this year are taking online courses, more in the United States, more take online courses than in-classroom courses. And some of those courses are coming from Coursera and the other MOOC providers. But there are other platforms that are really making an impact, particularly in the college sector. So there's lots of developments in this platform kind of space. When you get the slide deck from this show, and Sarah posts them pretty quickly after I finish, you'll also get a copy of a paper that goes with this presentation that will describe this in a bit more detail. We also have a massive knowledge explosion. So last year, 2025, 5.2 million new academic papers were published around the world in lots of different languages. And they were published in 37,000 journals. In 2024, by the way, there are only 30,000 journals. So we've got this knowledge explosion going on, to the point at which anybody who says I'm an expert in X, whatever X is probably not actually telling quite the truth, because none of us can keep up with the explosion of knowledge. We can use tools to help us do so, but it's moving so fast that next year, Elsevier, one of the biggest publishers in the world, confidently expects 6.8 million papers in 42,000 journals. So knowledge explosion is pretty big. And then we have governments and employers saying, listen, we can't really use your graduates because they don't have work-ready skills that we need. And so governments are now changing their funding formulas to say you have to have high rates of employment for the programs we fund. And to do that, you need to be much more focused on skills and competencies rather than the academic knowledge that universities have traditionally taught. And so there's a pressure on curriculum, on assessment, on work integrated learning, and on real life experiences and authentic assessment. So these are challenging us to behave differently. And some of my colleagues who are particularly impacted by job cuts and curriculum shutdowns, programs are going, particularly in the arts and social sciences, they're saying it's a big downturn. But I don't think so. I think this is one of those moments that are rare, which is an opportunity for completely redesigning our higher education systems and infrastructure. Now, that takes courage. And one of the things I observed in my interviews with leaders around the world is that's not a description of who leaders in our colleges and universities generally are. There are some courageous leaders, and my book describes who some of them are. So, some other things that are going on that impact faculty work. The majority of faculty in North America are contingent faculty, not tenure track. So I'm one of them. I have no work this semester from my academic employer, the University of Alberta, but I have 3 courses next semester, which I didn't anticipate. So I just don't know whether I'm working or not working. I'm a precarious contract worker, as are in the US, 70% of all faculty who teach at colleges and universities are precarious employees. We've also seen more administrative bullshit being dropped on our desks, more surveillance, more accountability, more reporting. How many people attended that Zoom session on Wednesday, Stephen? All that kind of stuff just drives me up the wall. You can find out. You have access to the system. And so we built this kind of audit and surveillance culture. In the faculty I'm attached to, the fastest growing group of employees are not faculty, it's administration. And in particular, administration tracking the behaviour of those of us who actually do the work. We've also had, as faculty, vulnerabilities from social media. So if you follow some of the academic freedom conversations, especially in the UK, there are probably about 40 faculty a year who've been dismissed for teaching things that the other members of their faculty, their peers and students and the public find unattractive or unacceptable. And yet we have academic freedom embedded into contracts of employment. Doesn't seem to make much difference. Universities and colleges are now more worried about their social reputation than they are about truth and academic freedom. Large numbers of students are experiencing mental health issues. In my own experience, it's something like 45% of the students I teach have vulnerabilities, particularly anxiety, stress, depression. Now, I happen to be a clinical psychologist by training, so I can help. But most of my peers in the faculty I teaching are not psychologists, don't have professional skills, and yet we're asked to cope with some of these issues. And this cancel culture, I don't need to say a lot, but it's very real. Just read some of the academic freedom cases that our trade unions talk about and are trying to defend members on. We have a big challenge for our identity as a profession, and our identity as academics is under strain. So this is the kind of first thing I'm saying. I think we're used to one thing. Some new things are emerging. There's more new stuff to come. We haven't seen anything yet. And these 3 different S-curves are all interacting now at the same time. So why does this matter? Why am I even doing this conversation? Well, I think we're in the midst of a change in what we do. Not all of us are recognizing that, where some of us are trying to cling on. Some of us are Klingons in the traditional science fiction sense. We're clinging on to a past and hoping all this stuff goes away. It won't. So what we have is a moment in time, a period of time, where we have a responsibility for thinking through where we stand on these issues. And by the way, saying I'm not changing is an acceptable and a fine position to take, but you'll be under increasing pressure to change. And so I think we need to renegotiate who we are and what we do and how we do it as part of our work in our institutions, whether it's a college, a university, a polytechnic, or some other kind of institution. Now, there's a bit of a trap. I will stop in a bit to see what's in the chat, but a lot of institutions think they're doing big things. Oh, we have a policy. Isn't that great? Another policy. I'll put it on the pile. I have 28 of them here so far. I've got another pile over here of policies we used to have but don't implement. So it's a lot of theatre, a lot of bull. And so what we have is things like, we've added AI to our learning management system. Really? We've got detection tools to catch the cheaters. I didn't know there were cheaters everywhere. Lions, I understand, and maybe, panthers, but cheetahs, that's kind of big. We have pilot projects, none of which ever become the dominant way in which we do business. They're just pilots. We never scale them. There's one of the biggest pieces of innovation theatre was this whole micro-credential boondoggle that many of us got into. And I kept saying, like, this is just not working. I mean, I wrote chapters of books and analysis of 1,000 micro-credentials, all of which showed they were kind of not really worth the weight of paper they were written on. But we all said, oh, this is a big change. No, it wasn't. We have new programs with virtually nobody taking them, and universities and colleges are now producing strategic plans at a faster rate. Isn't this great? It's all theatre, it's all nonsense, because what it is, it's covering up the fact that we're not really changing. What real change looks like is on the other side of this slide, completely reimagining what assessment is, completely redesigning how we engage students in learning, doing prototypes so we can scale them across the university or college in the way that, say, a university in Mexico has, or Arizona State has done. Building capability pathways so students can navigate their own journey through our institution. Why do we insist on program rules and regulations, say, oh no, you're in this program, you're not in this one? Hey, come on, it's the 2026. We can do all sorts of creative stuff. Let students work their own navigation through the complexity of our institution. And we still have a governance model for our colleges and universities that was built in the 1950s and 60s. The University of Toronto, for example, has a board of 52 members that governs the university. Apple, which is somewhat bigger as a corporation, has 14. We have 52. Makes no sense. We need to reimagine our institutions, what they do, how they do it, and who they're doing it for, and who they're doing it with. And that's my big proposition. This innovation theatre is what we get from trying to keep the same, but look as if we're doing something different. It's a bit of a mime. And this takes some kind of courage on the part of leaders. One of the observations I have is that our leadership and our governance systems are reacting to things rather than anticipating. I haven't seen a document yet from a college or university that talks about what we're going to do when quantum computing arrives. And we're just a few years away from that, and that will be transformative of a lot of things we do. Now, I recognize, because I've been a vice president of an institution, I've been a dean, I've done all that stuff. I recognize that we have things like collective agreements. I've also been a union officer trying to defend them. And I think that's fine. But our collective agreements need rethinking because they're getting in the way. And so I'm saying courage is absent in leadership. It's got to come from us. It's got to come from faculty taking a role to lead. And part of that is about leveraging the tools that we now have available to us that we didn't have available 5 years ago. And so I think we rather than focusing on using these tools to be more efficient, kind of getting better at doing the wrong things, we need to use these tools to be smart to do new things. And I think that that's our job. My family motto when I've been doing stuff is that forgiveness is easier to get than permission. So don't ask, do. And if you get caught, celebrate and say, look, this is why I'm doing this and this is the difference I can make. The real risk is if we don't act and the college and university leadership are slow to act, which is the case right now, with a few exceptions. What we will see is governments unbundling what we do. The growth of platform organizations, they will replace a lot of the functions we have. Teaching becoming more and more commodified and outsourced. That's one of the things that ChatGPT is kind of pushing. Academic labour being linked to modular learning, not to programs, not to tenure. So we'll be increasingly seen as instructors for Module X as opposed to designers of learning. And we'll see assessment being outsourced to third parties. This is the risk. And you may say, oh, come on, Steve, you've been, drinking the rum again. This is a bit far-fetched. No, it isn't, actually. These are some of the conversations I've been in with institutions around the world. And so my beginning message to you is faculty need to take the lead. Now, I'll just pause for a minute to see if we have any comments in the chat. Sarah, do I have to respond to anything?
Yeah, we actually have a few questions lined up. I don't know if we'll get to all of them at this part, but we'll do a few and see how time goes. So Michelle asks, according to the Chronicle of Higher Education, the post-secondary institutions that are thriving are those that are those are smaller humanities and liberal arts institutions that focus on aspects of our humanity that AI cannot replace. What do you think about this? What incentives do institutions have to refocus on their core mission of education over training, contrary to what employment sector is pushing, as you suggested?
Right, and as you will see later on in this conversation, I want to champion the evergreen skills that the humanities teach, because the skills that we kind of want to focus on, that a lot want to focus on, the employability skills, change rapidly, but the underlying skills of the humanities, compassion, critical thinking, teamwork, analysis, those kind of things, they are actually core to what we do. And these evergreen skills, which the smaller humanities institutions teach, are key. They've also made a strategic choice, is that some students and some parents do not want their kids just to be trained for a specific job. They want them to have the full immersive experience of what a college or university is like, because it is intensely personal and human and about human growth. So I'm a big fan of that, and as you'll see, I think some of the learning designs that we need to think about bring more of that back into what we do rather than less. So I think that's a key observation. It's not true everywhere. So in other parts of the world, smaller liberal arts colleges are struggling, but some of the ones we're talking about have got reasonable endowments. So at one point there was a liberal arts college closing every week in the US. That's kind of slowed down now. Most of the kind of vulnerable ones have gone. Okay, next question, Sarah, and then I'm going to have to move on.
Sounds good. We have a question from Rahul. The problem you described that post-secondary educations are facing is compounded with what Rosemary Dean called new managerialism. But under this guise of accountability, what are the chances that the changes you are proposing, advocating for, will take hold, especially in a province such as yours, Alberta, and mine, Ontario?
Well, the things I'm describing here are things we're actually trying to do in our own programs here at the University of Alberta. We just don't talk to the dean about it. I think that what's happening is we can get to some scale by networking with our peers inside a faculty grouping. But changing the organization is really difficult to do. So as you say, I'm in a neoliberal new public management organization, the University of Alberta, and many of the universities and colleges in Ontario are the same, driven by a government that's all about work and employment and skills. So there's a context we have to operate on, but we have to be subtle and we have to be politically smart. And I kind of do a lot of work under the radar and then pop up and say, do you know we've got 300 students doing this? What's your problem? And so the administration just doesn't know what to do with us, so they just leave us alone. And there's 5 or 6 of us, so it's not just this bold 75-year-old guy doing this work. There's quite a few of us kind of doing stuff to change the dynamic and change the patterns of learning. Okay, I'm going to move on because there's more to come. So we have kind of two views of the future. And this relates to one of the questions I've just responded to, the one about humanities and the smaller colleges. One kind of vision that sadly some ministers of higher education and most of the tech companies kind of have is this techno-economic university where efficiency, leveraging all these kind of surveillance and monitoring systems, optimizing revenues and cost, looking at employability metrics, focused on skills. This whole one side of this picture is the conversation you get by talking to the Council of Ministers, higher education ministers. And it's not very pretty. My good friend Percy Solberg at the University of Melbourne says what this model is about is doing the wrong things better, as being more efficient and effective at doing exactly the wrong things. I think that's quite a good insight. Where I'm coming from is this other kind of frame where what we have to do is nurture the whole person of the student we're working with. So human flourishing is what we're about. And to do that, we need to see the underlying unspoken curriculum as being about community engagement, ecological intelligence, democratic capability, critical thinking, and a concern for the planet. And if we have that frame versus this techno frame, then all sorts of opportunities come alive. In the paper that I've attached to the slide deck that you'll see when Sarah posted, I explain a lot more about this, and there's a whole body of work from the Royal Society of Arts on what regenerative learning looks like in schools, colleges and universities. And I think this is a frame for what it is we need to do. One way of thinking about the difference between these two frames is this simple question. And I've gone nuts in faculty meetings. I must have attended 20 where this question, how do we stop students cheating, kept being asked. And I say, well, we're responsible for students cheating. What's your problem? The better question is, what conditions produce deep and meaningful learning? And how do we change our practice to make this happen? That's the question I keep, when I hear this first question, this policing question, this I'm not willing to change question, this I'm not understanding what's going on in the real world right now question, how do we stop cheating? I ask this second question and I don't get an answer, except from my 5 good friends who are usually in the room. And we kind of have these two solitudes within our faculty organizations and within our institutions. One is this compliance thing. Look, these students have to do this exam. It's 70% of the course. Really? I haven't set an exam in 32 years. How do you know they're learning this stuff? Well, I'm not here to test recall. I'm here to test understanding and explore understanding and meaning and purpose. That's my job, not compliance. So these two frames are the same two frames we've just been looking at. I think what we have to recognize is that universities and colleges, if they try to do things as an institution, they're most likely to fail. So we know from research on major change in organization, and this comes from Deloitte, that 85% of major change efforts by organizations fail. And worse, 15% of those that succeed do not succeed in the medium to long term. So the figure is actually worse. Also, those institutions that produced AI policies 2 years ago must think they're pretty daft right now, because I kept saying, do not have policies. It's too early in terms of where AI is going. Have some policies around security, privacy, have some about ethics. So a big general frame is all right. But when you start to specify what you can and can't do with AI, it just encourages students to find a way around it. And in K-12, for example, those school boards that turned off access to AI. That lasted about 15 minutes before the first kid worked out how to breach that kind of constraint. So kids are smart, and particularly, the younger they are, the smarter they are. So grade 7 kids in our school system here in the city of Edmonton dealt with the encryption issue in about 15 minutes. So we are the ones that can create strategic intention, the kind of big idea, into action. We can turn possibilities into reality. So here, I want to get really specific about what you can be thinking about. I think, and here I am broadcasting, so it's a bit of a kind of paradox. We're still sage on the stage, so we still have a lot of that going on. In our classes that we teach, I teach both undergraduate and graduate studies, we don't. There's kind of 10 minutes of sage on the stage. The rest of it is dialogue, engagement, interactivity. So we teach less and learn more is one of the kind of mantras that we heard from the Minister of Education in Singapore some years ago, that we're teaching too much and the students aren't learning. Don't confuse these two things. Just because you're teaching doesn't mean to say anybody's learning. What we should be about is engaged learning. And we know from studies of other organizations like business that the most powerful predictor of profitability and performance in the private sector is how engaged an employee is in their work and how much ownership they feel of their work. I think it's no different here. So what's our job? I think our job is to design learning experiences that those students we're working with will never forget. I think we have to recognize that in our class, I have currently a grad student class of 32, I've got 9 different categories of students in that class. Some of them are very advanced, very skilled, very able to think conceptually. Others are very not in that category. They're very tactile, need to see, show me, explain, let me practice. So I need to practice differentiated instruction. And I think I have to reimagine what assessment looks like. So as I say, I haven't sat an exam in years. What I get students to do is stuff that will make a difference and have an impact on their day-to-day lives and work. So my assessment designs begin with what can I create with my students, what can I co-create with them that they will value and turn back to frequently because it helps them in their day-to-day lives. And I do a lot of this work, all of the things I'm describing now, by working with 1 or 2 students or 2 or 3 students who can help me think about where they are and what their journey needs to be for them to be successful. And so, I've gone from, when I started back in 1066 in the teaching business, just after the Battle of Hastings, this is what the work looked like on the one side, the before kind of side. But right now, my kind of ideal world is stimulus, engagement, activity, impact, co-created assessments that make a difference, really thinking about how we can create valuable interactions, not just within the room, but with other people outside of our room, our Zoom room or our real classroom, that can help us think about the world differently. So we're all for connecting globally, connecting to other networks, and we're all about helping students learn how to be a network hub. And that really takes us to what we call regenerative thinking frameworks, which are these kind of things that we need to think about how we ensure our instruction is relevant to the context in which our students work and live, that it connects to the place they are. Like you can't teach some of the stuff we're teaching about AI without reference to indigenous communities or the North or to climate change. You can't. It just has to be part of the place that we work from. We have to think about learning not as sequential but as circular, that learning connects to other learning and it's a kind of circular learning experience. And many, many years ago when I was working at the Open University, we had a group of courses that we created that cut across the faculties. They were called U courses. And they looked at an issue like risk or change or possibility across all of the disciplines that we taught at the university. And I think we need to see more of that kind of stuff. So in our courses, we bring in expertise and knowledge from physics, from social science, from psychology, from earth sciences. We connect kind of knowledge where it's appropriate to the problems that we're dealing with. And so our intention isn't to assess how good a student is at regurgitating knowledge. It's to have impact on that person, impact on their position in life, on their growth as a person, not just in knowledge and learning, but in their social and emotional growth as well. So I think that's our big work. And I think some of the AI tools help us do some of this work, but it's all about connecting to the person as a real person. And I've stopped seeing my students as students. I see them as peers and colleagues who can help us think about the world and what we're doing with it in creative and constructive ways. This helps with these issues of mental health because we're not throwing buckets of knowledge at them and testing them every 3 weeks. We're actually sharing our understanding and engaging with them and building ownership of our learning together. Some of the mental health issues kind of go away. Some of them become very clear. And so I think we can embrace some of the trauma-informed pedagogy that many of us have to use, particularly if we're working with people who've just arrived from Ukraine or the Middle East, or people who've got indigenous histories. We have to have trauma-informed instructional design in our mind. And I would encourage everybody to look at the work of Philippa Hardman and her designs for learning and instructional design, because they speak to some of these issues. Now, my university says we need grades, Stephen, we need grades. And so one of the things we do is ask students to create their own grades. So tell me what grade you think your participation in this course is worth. Here's the rubrics, judge yourself. We also ask them to peer assess each other's work and to assess their own work. We assess it as well, but we do so in a collaborative space. And so, the tyranny of grades is not part of our kind of mantra. We're not gods on a stage giving you an A or a B or a C or asking you to repeat this paper. And the reason we're doing that is not because we're worried about cheating. No, we're not. Cheating's been around since the Ming Dynasty. What we're worried about is that the assessment activities are meaningful, make sense to the person. So, this whole cheating conversation is a design failure, and we are part of that failure. We actually are co-conspirators with the students to cheat. We've made grades more important than learning, particularly for Gen Z students. So, we have, and lots of my peers around the world have, reimagined assessment. They've done so in lots of different ways. But we've actually reimagined assessment as something valuable, meaningful, and something the students want to do because it will help them explore and understand what the meaning of this work is for their own lives or their own work. And that moves us from being concerned about the transcript into saying, look, we can provide you with a portfolio understanding of what you've learned in this course. You have artifacts you can share with your peers, with employers, with other people that you might be seeking work from, to say, this is the use case I wrote for using AI with special needs kids. This is the creative lesson I created in partnership with peers and AI for Indigenous students to learn about their treaty rights. Whatever it may be, we can create knowledge and learning portfolios. And so I think, rather than looking at platform institutions, we need to think about ecosystems for learning, think about broadening our connections with others around the world. And there's nothing wrong with leveraging these assets from the platform organizations, which we do all the time, especially the free stuff that we can make available. So, any quick questions, Sarah, before I get to the final part of the show?
Well, there are some questions. I don't know about how quick, but I can pick a few if you want to take a pause.
Yeah, pick two.
Okay. This one's from Jill. As much as I'm for promoting mastery, goal orientation over performative one, this is unfortunately the academic norm. And from the student experience, there can be quite a bit of student anxiety when we move away from a performance norm because they don't understand what the stakes are, unlike performance-based grades. How do we push this, quote, revolution at scale?
You get them involved in co-designing it. So rather than saying, okay, we're going to stop doing this stuff, we're now going to do this stuff, we say, let's have a conversation about what assessment means to you. And let's talk about some alternatives. And let's explore, and this may be a full lesson, but it's worth it. Let's explore what the opportunities for thinking differently about assessment are. And then judge with them what change you can make with that group at this time. But what will happen, and I first did this, this is how old I am, when I started teaching at the University College Cardiff in 1975, we began our class, Ray Wolf and I, we had 322 students with a conversation about assessment. How would you like to be assessed? Would you like to be assessed at all? And they all looked shocked, but we had that conversation, and that led us to peer-to-peer assessment and project-based assessments for that particular program of studies, which made it easier from our point of view. We didn't have to mark 300 assignments. We had to oversee the peer-to-peer assessment work, and we only had to mark 50 projects, so it was much easier. So I think involve them in design and get them to own the opportunity to think differently. And you might be surprised. You will always have some that say, look, I much prefer for you to tell me I'm an A student. That what they're really saying is never tell me I'm a C student. I'm always an A student. So, I'm Gen Z. That's how I think. I don't think they know what's possible until you have the conversation. Good question. Next question.
Okay, this one is from Trish. The regenerative and human flourishing institutions look to me to be a lot like the Montessori way to educate. Do you agree? And if yes, why are we not using Montessori and Waldorf and how Finland educates in our schools at all levels?
So I'm talking mainly about higher education, not K-12. But our new book on AI in K-12 schools coming out in May from Routledge explores that. And I think a lot of the human flourishing regenerative thinking work that the Royal Society is encouraging in young communities around the world is very much Montessori, kind of. It's not specifically the Montessori method, but it's that frame of thinking, kind of Carl Rogers encounter kind of methods as well. So I think you're right. I think we should be looking at going back to the beginning and saying, what is the Socratic work we need to be engaged in our institutions, and how do we do that well? Good questions. In the interest of community safety, I'm going to move on to the next section of this show. So, what's the new work of faculty, in my view? I think, and I intensely use AI all the time, and I have no qualms in doing so, and I'm quite happy to run a separate session on how I do that. AI can take away some of the drudgery of the work we do as faculty. It can do some of the basic tutoring. So, for example, we have built chatbots for certain aspects of the stuff we do. On the course that I'm teaching with a colleague right now for leading non-profit organizations, we've built an AI simulation of a culture audit to undertake for their own non-profit organization. but that actually is also a tutoring engine about how to think about culture, psychological safety, some of the issues that people have in connecting to the organization they work for. So you can take away some of the kind of grunt work of faculty and actually enable us to focus on the more creative work that we do, which is this other stuff, making meaning. So this morning, I was exploring some designs for a session we're holding in Calgary in a couple of weeks' time. We have 3 hours with 200 people exploring what the future of AI is for the Catholic school system there. And what I was doing is designing that encounter. And I was kind of having a conversation with Claude, the LLM. And really, together, we've created this design for this encounter with 200 people in a room in Calgary in 2 weeks' time. We can do lots of things separately without AI that AI can encourage and support. So I think we have some opportunities to do better work in less time. And nothing we ever do with AI should remove the human from the loop. So, for example, I'm not in favor of taking student assignments and getting an AI system to mark them. What we have done, both my colleague J.C. Couture and I, is we have marked individually our student assignments, given feedback, and then run the student assignment through AI and got its feedback using the same rubric and shared both ours and the AI's feedback with the student. And our students have all said, we've never had this level of feedback and this feedback quality from either people or a system before in our entire university career. So, human in the loop is a principle, and it's a must-have principle, and it's something we should all insist on. I think we should refuse some of these kind of things like more surveillance, more accountability. We should be saying, no, we're not doing that. I'm not filling in these forms. And all the attempts to de-skill us by getting systems to do the work that we're supposed to do. I think it's good to look at AI as tools for workload reduction, for making work more personalized, deepening inquiry, reimagining assessment, and partnering with students for co-creation. So I think we should, each of us, build our own, this is what I'm not willing to do, and this is what I want to use technology and other tools for. And we have choices. And I'm not willing to do any more form filling for the university I work for, especially given the level of pay I get as a sessional. But I think the big change that I've made in my last 5 years when AI has started to be really quite something is moving from this kind of one side of this ledger to this other side. And I was deliberately looking for words that captured the kind of essence of the work I do. I'm kind of a cartographer, mapping the learning journey, a weaver, making connections, a gardener, kind of planting seeds and then nurturing them to grow them during the course of a course or program. I'm a steward of the learning of the students I care for, and I'm an architect. I'm designing the infrastructure that will support and enable them to own some learning. That's the work. And I think this means, given that there's a lack of courageous leadership, we have to do the work. I think we have to work within existing structures, but they are actually very vulnerable to change from the ground up. And they give us a lot of freedom, especially in the universities, a bit less in colleges. But I think we have more freedom than we give ourselves credit for, particularly if you act collectively at the departmental level. And I think we can move beyond pilots to prototypes that can scale. So we started doing some interesting stuff 3 years ago in our particular course. That's now gone into 7 courses. We don't teach the other 6. And our colleagues cottoned on and said, can we use that? We said, sure, here's how we did it. And they've picked it up and have gone from a little pilot that we were doing to a prototype that could change the way the department works. We've gone from these kind of ridiculous things like 70% exams, I mean, that's still going on, goodness knows why, to this more kind of engaged learning kind of frame. And you'll see this slide, you can pick this up a bit more when you get to look at the things we're doing. But we do these kind of things, policy labs, project-based work, building a capability portfolio, writing a micro brief for a superintendent of schools or for a school principal or for the head of cardiac surgery, whatever the kind of context is for the work we're doing. So we can change how we do stuff and how we think about what the work looks like. And this is just another way of capturing some of these thinking. So I want to end with this question. So what can you do next semester? And this is not a trivial question because, you know, we all have to think about what's next for us. I think you can get rid of an exam and replace it with some kind of authentic assessment. I think you can get past just showing people how to use an AI tool and start to show them how students can have agency with AI and think about what the disclosure of that needs to be for academic integrity kind of purposes. I think we can get past some of these issues around students stopping thinking because they're using AI by encouraging more reflective learning. So we introduce what's called reflective metacognition. So there are some tools and skills for that. And Philippa Hardman has some terrific resources related to that. I think we can look at more kind of connections outside the classroom to community organizations, to other classrooms, to other networks of communities of practice and communities of interest. I think we can stop thinking about design of our instruction for knowledge transfer and thinking about development of capabilities. Think about it as development of knowledge, understanding, skills and capabilities. And I want us to hit all of those categories. And I want students to create their memorable assets that they will reuse time and time again. Cases, examples. I get students to do interviews with people that are role models. I get students to interview each other and capture some of that and say, this is what this person does and thinks differently from me about how they learn with the stuff that we're both learning together. I think there's lots of things you can do to get going to say, I'm on a change journey and I'm owning my change. So I think that's my challenge to you is redesign learning, prototype the future, lead from the bottom and the middle, and waiting is no longer an option. This is our time to show what we know, what we care about, and what we can do. So if you want to, the first book here is the one I published recently. The other one was published 2 years ago. These two things capture some of this stuff. And then when you get the slide deck, which will be on the Teach Online site, there's a brand new paper that I'm still working on, but I shared this morning's version. Sarah will share that later. This is how you can find me. Now I'm happy to answer any questions that are still in the chat, and I'll stop sharing to do that. Sarah,
Great.
any
Okay.
question I can pick up?
Yes, we have a few here in the queue. I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them, but we'll get to a few here. David asks, you paint a techno-economic and regenerative as mutually exclusive, quote, solitudes. Is this true, or can there be both?
I'm using technology to do the regenerative work. I'm using technology for human flourishing. The techno kind of two solitudes slide was about saying, yeah, but that's not how OpenAI, it's not how some of the ministers I've talked to think about this stuff. They see it as doing the same things we're doing now, better, faster, smarter, cheaper with fewer people. And that's the techno future that worries me. So when I talk about the techno university or the techno college, that's what I'm referring to. It's the Passy Solberg line of, we can now do everything cheaper, faster, better that we shouldn't be doing at all.
Okay, we have a question from Nicola. What are your thoughts on critical AI literacies? There are quite a few universities worldwide that outsource one-size-fits-all courses for staff and students. How can we develop critical AI literacies in a regenerative way?
But by challenging our students to solve a practical problem. And so one of the things we do with our both undergrads and grad students is get them to develop a use case for the deployment of AI in a concrete practical setting, in a non-profit, in a school, in a college, a university, a hospital, a community organization, whatever. And by getting them to think about how AI could help deal with a practical issue, we can have a conversation about the limits and boundaries of AI. And so we have 500 use cases that our students have developed just for K-12 schools over the last 5 years. And when you look at the patterns of them, they really have evolved over time to be more powerful. And one of the things we did was, once we got one group, we shared all those use cases with the next group of students. And some of our academic colleagues say, well, that makes cheating easy. Well, sure. If that's what they want to do, it will make it dead easy. I guarantee you not one of them will, and not one of them did. Just because you're sharing past examples of the same work doesn't mean to say they're going to copy and cheat. It just stimulated them to do more, better, smarter. Next question.
Okay, Ute says, we see two big fears among faculty as they are approaching AI. Fear of a steep learning curve and potentially substituting their work. What do you recommend to change people's attitude?
Create a playroom where you can play with AI and not be required to produce an artifact or a product. We basically run boot camps for faculty that want to join us in this kind of journey. And we run boot camps saying, like, what's your big problem right now? Okay, let's see what we can do with Claude or ChatGPT or Perplexity or Notebook LM. Let's play with this and show you what's possible. And then you go away and play and then come back 2 weeks from now and tell us what you're learning and what's worrying you and what we can do to help. So rather than seeing as, oh, you need to understand these things, we say, no, just play. And I think, that's how most kids learn, particularly young kids. And with this stuff, we're all young kids. We're just finding out. It's a playground. Play. Okay, I think we're going to have to call it a day, Sarah. So my email address is in the slide deck. Do drop me a note if you want more. When you look at teachonline.ca for the slide deck, you will also get a copy of this new paper. I'm still working on it. I'm still writing. So if you want to send me feedback, send me a note. But happy to respond to any emails that you might send. But meantime, on behalf of Contact North, Contact Nor, and Sarah and myself, thank you so much for joining us. It's exactly noon.